Welcome everybody back to Segal Talks here at the Martin E. Segal Theater Center, the Graduate Center, CUNY, at the City University in Manhattan, in New York, where slowly things are opening again, bars, restaurants, and businesses, important businesses, construction. And of course, with lots of question marks, crowds are gathering outside after that long lockdown, but a lot without masks, without paying attention perhaps to the distancing, but it's understandable after this long time of confinement. But it's full of uncertainties. What will happen? The immunity is about 1%, one thinks, of people who have had it. 70% is needed for herd immunity. And there are many signs from countries that reopen that numbers are going up, even in America. Even so, some politicians say, no, it's just because it's testing. Pence said that yesterday, the vice president, but there are indications now that this is still, we are not over it, but on the other hand, life in a way has to continue. Theater, of course, is suffering. There's no end in sight. For the end of the year and also next spring, we do not know what will happen worldwide, as we hear in France or Italy, in Germany, spaces open up slowly with 10%, 20, 30% of audiences, lots of outside work. But we do not know what theater will be like, look like, what we can do and what not. So many artists, especially in America, out of work. It's not a great system. It's compared to many of what we hear online. It's actually devastating. No Ministry of Culture, no support. 8-9 months ahead, everything canceled for musicians, dancers, theater makers, performers. And traditional revenue incomes like working in bars and restaurants also don't work. So we really are still in a moment of great uncertainty, and we need to find out, as Jean-Luc Nancy, who was on our program, the philosopher, said, what is the value of human life? When does one take into account that there will be casualties, one not? And so we really do not know, but we heard very, very encouraging, moving, and significant contributions from theater makers around the world, around the globe. We have now over 90 artists almost who were involved in our Segal Talks. And today we come to an important part of the world, Asia. A play we, at least in Europe and America, do not know about. It's not as much on our radar as it should be. All that energy, innovation, tradition, long tradition, and everything, but especially in theater and performance, dance and puppetry. So today we have two representatives who have dipped their toes into the New York scene a little bit. Govin Ruben, hi Govin, and Terence Conrad from TerryandTheCuz, the company that somehow is a bit, we will tell about moving between Australia and Malaysia. And they are part of our international lineup today. Yesterday, we had the great Peter Schumann from the Bread and Puppet Theater with us, who's in Vermont. Normally 80, 90 people are on the farm. They are 6 or 7 now, and they make small performances in the forest. Once they use 20, 30,000 people would come to their shows. Tomorrow, we have Tania Bruguera from Cuba, the significant an important artist, a theater artist, performance artist, socially engaged artist who defines activism and art and the space in between as the most significant. What we can do, also things you can't sell, you can't buy, but it makes a difference in the life of people and how to create meaning. We have Hope Azeda from Rwanda on Thursday, who will tell us about the situation in a country that has survived terrible times, civil wars, atrocities, genocide, and now Corona is there. What does it mean for a theater maker? And Saman Amini, a theater artist born in Iran, moved to the Netherlands and created work there, and will tell us a bit about that reality. But now we really focus on Malaysia, on Govin and Terence. So first of all, thank you for taking the time to spend with us. What time is it? It doesn't look like noon.
Well, it's 12 a.m. now, so it's basically Wednesday morning in Kuala Lumpur.
Yeah, we should be fast asleep, but we stayed up for this talk.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us, by the way.
Especially after, it was such a great lineup of Peter Schumann, Tanya, Hope Azeda, and, we felt like we had odd ones out, so we thought we better stay up for this.
Yeah, no, it is significant, for us to know about what perhaps is a little bit more unknown. I think once it used to be Eastern Europe, theater in Poland and Hungary or Romania. Now we know a little bit more. Worlds have come closer together. But now I think it is also Asia that is perhaps a bit more and should be more on our radar. It is a continent, of course, of the future and the work, and also an incredible, great tradition. And Hans Thies Lehmann, who wrote the great post-traumatic theater book, when it came to Asia, they said, that's great. Yeah, there has always been like this. We have puppets and movement, sounds, words next to each other. That's great that Europe is catching up, on what we are doing, but good to have it written down in a book form. So you guys, tell us a little bit before we come to your work. Are you in confinement? Are you in lockdown? What is the situation in Malaysia when you go out tomorrow morning on the street?
Well, Malaysia has opened up. So we started the lockdown on the 18th of March, and it was a sort of full proper lockdown. You could not travel 5 kilometers away from where your residential address was. This lockdown, there were 4 major stages. Each stage was about 2 to 4 weeks, depending on which stage it was. It was pretty harsh. So there was no interstate travel. There was only certain supermarkets you could go to, and everything was shut, of course. And then what happened is, as of the 1st of June, things started opening up a bit. And then now, basically, sort of what they call a conditional movement control order, where things have opened, so you can go to restaurants, you can go to cafes, but everything is operated at a sort of 50% capacity. There's sort of social distancing guidelines, and so the only sort of things that are sort of still shut are, sort of massage parlors and theaters.
So it's a great company. Theater finds itself in, I think also by our Polish friends, said that at TR Warsaw, that the government made sure to write in one sentence, massage salons and theaters will be the first one to close and the last one to open. And
both provide really great excitement and enjoyment for everyone, and relief and stress and all of that.
Yeah, but there's a connection. It's about the body. And
one is a physical massage, one is a mental massage.
Yeah, that is true. So in France, people had to print out permits. In Italy, you could only go from your home to the next supermarket. So even 5 kilometers seemed to be pretty liberal. Did it work? How is the situation? How many infections and deaths?
Well, today, we initially, when we started it on March 18th, we were...
Can you come a little closer so we don't hear so well?
We had about 200 infections almost a day, and around 150 to 200 infections a day. Mm-hmm. And they started reducing the conditions and liberating for people to go out more once it started dropping below 100. As of today, over the last week, we've had between 5 to 11 cases a day.
Really?
And it's been very well monitored and controlled until today. And so most businesses are back, but there's still, everything's operating at 50%. Wherever you go, you need to register. Every business needs to take your temperature, get your if you walk into a restaurant, you walk into a supermarket, you walk into to get your haircut, they need to take all your details.
They take your temperature if you go into a business?
Yes, they go.
So they have a heat sensor at the entrance.
Yes, yeah. Some places even take your photograph together with your temperature, while some places just take your details and your
with your national ID number. So this is like an Orson Welles' sort of wet dream. So everybody, there's information about everyone that's recorded down, who's going where. So this will help with the tracking. If in case there's a new case, they can literally identify where the cluster starts
and who's exposed to it. So so they will be able to track and quarantine people in case there's a new cluster. So that's what they've been doing. And so far, it's been working very well for us.
So that's quite stunning. So kind of Orwellian surveillance state where the human is like almost like made out of glass. You can see everything, what he or she does, where you go, what you do, and it's controlled, can be traced.
That's a scary thing, right? To control something like this, they had to resort to such draconian system, which we would never allow. But it has reduced the number of. It has succeeded in the cases.
Succeeded,
Yeah, as of today, we had the highest number of recovery. There are more people recovered than and there's only a few hundred people. There's only 200 people recovering from it, and there's only been 11 cases today. So yeah, it is a success story, even though we may not agree with the method, so to speak.
Yeah, what a situation. It's such a living in contradictions. So you can now go out with mask whenever you want and drive around. So tell us a little bit, for theater artists in Malaysia, what did COVID mean? Did you get support? Did shows go on? Did rehearsals go on? What is what?
So the theater industry, like I said, together with the massage industry, has come to a complete halt. Which it's quite shocking and tragic. And prior to that, the arts, if you look at it from a Malaysian sense, the arts contributed to about 11.2 sort of billion to the national economy, which is about 2% of the economy of KL.
Incredible, it's a super high number.
Yeah, and it sort of provided about 86,000 jobs or so. And this was a survey done by an organization here in Malaysia. And when everything shut, obviously some venues are still sort of trying to support the staff, but almost 70% of arts practitioners have lost their jobs. And in a place like Malaysia, where, until very recently, there hadn't been too much sort of grant support or support from the government. And this has changed in the last few years, where slowly the arts have been recognized as a formal industry and people have been sort of putting money towards the arts. Not much, but it is a start. So the thing is, a lot of the theaters, a lot of the venues, a lot of the artists, so this was all kind of sort of a very capitalistic sort of function in how things went about. So, restaurants that function within theaters would support the performance of ticket sales, you get corporate sponsors. So that's kind of how it sort of sustained itself for the longest time. And because of the pretty much the complete halt of any sort of performances, these incomes have not been able to flow, and therefore, of course, people have literally just stopped and have been living off savings. There have been lots of initiatives that have appealed to the government to now kind of try and support artists. The Malaysian government has come up with a couple of schemes to sort of help, not artists, but to help sort of Malaysians to kind of cope with what's happening. And I think, the artists are sort of lumped with everybody else. And so this is sort of what's been happening to the arts in general. So it is a pretty dire situation. I think, obviously, everybody is still looking to see how we come out of this. And also, it'll be very interesting to see how many companies actually survive or, be able to start again. And some companies have started running online donations and online funding campaigns to sort of help sustain their venues. They've had buy a seat program, and people have been supporting, but it's nothing compared to what is actually affecting the entire industry, at this particular stage.
So at the moment, are there any theater performances? Is anything going on you're aware of?
Nothing. There's no. One of the main rules of this movement control, which they've done recently, is that there's still no gatherings of people above 20, which is still not allowed. They've only begin, and religion is a big part in Malaysia. So even religious places are now only being opened. So no theater, no performances, no entertainment outlets, nothing, complete zero still.
So you can't go to the church, you can't go to the mosque, you can't go to temple. So everything is sort of, any places where you can gather is still pretty much shut. And so that's kind of what's happening. Of course, I think a lot of artists have sort of responded and taken some programs online and have been kind of performing and creating online content and sort of diversifying and kind of adapting. But we can't speak for how successful that has been in terms of financial remuneration. So yeah, it is a very, it is a hard time for most artists in Malaysia. And therefore, but the good thing is, and this is the one sort of, I think, I don't know if you can say or you can call it positive, but because this has sort of become this point where suddenly everybody can see the flaws in the system. Everybody can suddenly point out that, oh, look, this isn't working. We've contributed this much, but there haven't been any formal support. And we've been doing all of this with corporate, private support, but yet we are contributing this much to GDP. And so therefore, for the first time in a long time, there has actually been very open discussions from the industry personnel and members of the government, like right to the top. So very recently, there was a meeting with the Ministry of Finance and arts practitioners, something that was almost unheard of 5, 6, 7 years ago. So this was, imagine a group of artists being able to sit down with the Secretary of Treasury of America and sit down and go like, we need art funding. And therefore, I think what this has pointed out is a significant lack or gap in the support for the arts. And therefore, the government have now heard, and have seen where these gaps are. What becomes of it, we don't know, but it is a start in kind of pointing out, look, this is the areas in which we need support. And these are the numbers to prove how much the arts in Malaysia, and the arts in Malaysia is not just performances, it's crafts, it's handicrafts, it's sort of
traditional performances,
artisanal products, and so it is a huge range that actually contributes to the cultural economy of the country, and it also sort of puts us in this sort of unique sort of place where we are a tourist destination, and I think when people come, the arts, whether it's through song, whether it's through traditional form of dance and performances, that there are lots of cultural shows that happen. And also, the contemporary theatre scene. But I think the tourism industry has really suffered from this, and we do make a lot of money from tourism as artists, and a lot of artists actually kind of contribute to that sector. And I think these are now gaps where the government has started to look at, and hopefully something positive happens post, Corona.
So another interesting thing in Malaysia is also that just before the coronavirus pandemic spread to this part of the world, there was a new government installed in Malaysia, which is within a couple of weeks of being installed, they had to deal with this. So they never really got to actually get comfortable within their role, and they had to deal with this pandemic, which they have done, like I said, magnificently well compared to a lot of countries around the world. But seeing that when they came in, that they started seeing that a lot of people lost jobs, a lot of industries had to shut. They had to hear from each and every industry, and that gave a very unique meeting, as Govin was saying, between the arts practitioners of Malaysia and the Minister of Finance and his team. And he got to hear firsthand from the arts practitioners on how they have had their income totally decimated by this pandemic, how people who own theaters couldn't continue to manage these theaters, couldn't afford to make their rental, pay their staff, electricity bills, basic stuff like that, because they couldn't get any seats, couldn't get their seats filled. So this is a very unique opportunity which was afforded to the arts sector in Malaysia by the thing, and they got to hear and not only talk about Malaysia, I mean, sustaining through this COVID pandemic, but also beyond, which is a conversation which we rarely get, because in Asian countries, and especially in Malaysia, when people talk about the arts, they usually refer to traditional arts, not contemporary arts, even though we have a burgeoning contemporary art scene. And a lot of government funding grants goes towards the preservation of traditional arts, traditional artists, traditional performances. And during this time, a lot of contemporary artists, and there are a lot, got to voice out on their needs, on how on the sustainability, and also growing after the COVID pandemic of the contemporary arts scene. So that was an opportunity which I doubt would have never arose if COVID pandemic had not taken place. So there was a unique situation which came about also.
Incredible to hear that you used the word magnificent. How your government reacted here in America, of course, is a devastating thing. The richest country in the world is not able to do what Malaysia is achieving. Of course, different circumstances, 5 million people take a New York subway every day and all of it, but still, it's just stunning to see how forms of government really make a difference. And the same is also for theater. Forms of theater, the way it's produced, supported, also produces results that are different. We are looking at, what contribution theater makes and what works, and how it should go on. For you as theater artists, how did you experience this time of lockdown? What did you do? How did you deal with it?
Well, I think when it comes to we're in a very, very unique situation, Frank. In a sense, and I know this sounds funny and a bit insane, but so we like to call ourselves storytellers, right? And we told stories, and that's how we started. And like most stories, most of it start in comedy, and so that was how we started 10 years ago. We made comedy, and we started doing quite well, and very soon there was lots of companies that basically said, could you do something for our Christmas party, or can you do these big dinners and whatever not? And whilst we never put our name to that formally, those were sort of projects that they call corporate projects that then paid you a significant amount of money that then sustained you to do your art projects. And for a lot of companies in Malaysia, that's kind of how it's always been sustained. But one of the things that happened with one big project that we did very early on, Terry very brilliantly said we should use the profits to start an industrial laundry. And so we actually started an industrial laundry. So as a company, we sort of wash clothes for hospitals, hotels, and gyms. And that business sort of grew over the years. It's a pretty simple business. Dirty clothes come in, we wash, dry, and iron, and send it back out. And we got to make our art while the money just kept rolling. And so because we did that, and that business was sort of basically how our debauchery was sort of funded, we got to do whatever we wanted to do and try out whatever we want to try. And so we made the.
And you ended up at the Public Theater in New York, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And we ended up at the Public in New York.
Pretty funny story.
But it also meant that because we never relied on government funding, and because we never relied on sponsorship or any of those capitalistic measures to sustain ourselves, it just allowed us to kind of try new ideas, create new things. And funnily enough, when the COVID, so I don't mean to laugh, but when the COVID crisis hit, because we are washing for hospitals, we became essential services. So the government paid us promptly. I mean, we lost some business on the gyms and the hotels, but essentially we were sustained because we washed for about 8 or 9 hospitals across the country. And so we've been going to work every day. And this period, and so one of the things we also, as a company, we're also very lucky, because a few years ago, our big break sort of came when we had an idea for a project, and we managed to get into the Pitch New Works at ISPA, which is the International Society for the Performing Arts. That's how I know Rachel. And through that network, I guess our North American sort of exposure grew.
Tell about the project. Tell us a little bit about that project.
So that project was called Skin. It was a work about true stories based around human trafficking. And that project we made in collaboration with a human rights organization in Malaysia called Tenaga Nita and an Australian artist, Ashley Dyer. Because there was a huge, I mean, this is 2015, 2016, and it's still the case, but Malaysia has a huge number of migrants, foreign migrants who are a big part of our workforce, and a lot of them are undocumented. And therefore, we never realized how many undocumented migrants there were until, a couple of really unique situations pointed it out. And then we started to dig in a bit more, and we spent 2 years researching the subject. So the final work was essentially a sort of work where an audience sort of gets processed. We take their names, they sign a sort of a waiver, a liability waiver. They hand over their phones, their wallets. They fill in a questionnaire. They get weighed. They get sort of tested. They do a physical test. They come in. We do an interview with them, and we decide if they're good enough to watch the show. And then some people don't get to watch the show. Some people get to watch the show, but they get to watch it in sort of very different ways. And then everybody gets huddled into a shipping container, and they see this sort of work in contemporary dance happen between two shipping containers. So, lined up side by side. And halfway through the piece, one of the shipping containers start to move, and half the audience get dropped off in a different part of the city.
We traffic half the audience.
And they have to find their way back with no ID, no money, no cash, while the other half of the audience gets treated to sort of champagne, nuts, cheese, and sort of pretzels. But the idea behind the whole thing is to sort of examine the sort of privilege that we have and what happens when we take away control. And then, of course, at the end, all the groups of the audience end up back at a sort of a post-show gallery space where the human rights organizations that have participated are there, and people have a conversation about what just happened. And through that, they actually get to learn about, sort of how that experience and how they felt. And then they get to talk to, sort of real refugees, real migrants, and kind of go like that. Well, that was my story. So that was a project we did in 2015. We pitched it at ISPA, and it's since sort of traveled to like 5 different cities. In January, we had a major breakthrough with it coming to New York, but post-COVID, I don't know how we're going to do a show where people can sit crammed into a shipping container, but it's not for any time soon. But yeah, so I think through that network, we started to sort of grow, and in January when we were there, one of the things that I said to Terry when we got back, I said, look, we are in a very interesting position of privilege because we run this laundry that basically means we don't have to make art to make money. And I do think now that we are at this cusp of actually sort of through ISPA, sort of really examining why we're doing what we're doing. So with 2020 being the sort of new decade, we've been operating for 10 years and we've got this next 10 years to come. So the main idea was actually that we should take a break from the art because we've got money coming in, we're going to sustain ourselves, but we're going to start to refocus and realign. If we were going to tell this story in New York, how are we going to do it? Where do we refocus and recenter our art making practice? And, as we were doing that and as we were kind of dropping out of kind of making immediate projects, COVID hit.
So it was a very unique experience for us folk during COVID because we had decided in January that we would take a break to focus on creating work and what will define us for the next few years. So we had literally turned down work for 2020, canceled projects. We even turned down a grant to which we would do work in Malaysia because we said that our idea is that we didn't want the grant, we didn't want to continue to create work just because we had a grant. We wanted to create work which would define TerryandTheCuz and define the next decade. So in January and February, Govin and I sat down, we started drawing up the projects we had. And in February, we sat down and every day we were working, and then COVID happened. And so then for us, it was just, oh wow, was this like, were we clairvoyant in that? So we were literally, during the whole period of COVID, what we did every day almost, we just sat down every day, we went, we worked, we just kept on writing, kept on figuring out stories.
But walk us through a day. How would a day look like that in COVID? You go in the morning, you go to your business, and then you say, so how do you get up? And how does the day look like in Malaysia?
I will tell you how the day looked like, because as Govin told you, we ran a laundry, so we had permission to go out to our office every day.
So we had a letter that allowed us to drive through.
Yeah. What time did you go out to the laundry?
We were going to work in about 11 o'clock in the morning, pretty late, and then we will be there for 4 or 5 hours. Driving there would be insane because there will be no one on the streets. There was no cars. We would go through two or three police roadblocks, which was meant to deter people from traveling and meeting people. And then we will end up there. Literally, the streets would be there empty, and all you would see is probably ambulances during the first few weeks of this COVID pandemic here. And then we will work for about 5 to 6 hours, just drawing up structures, talking on what we wanted, like this story, like.
So you went to the laundry business. That's your art office is there.
Yeah, office is on top.
You watch people working, and you work inside.
So it's a 2-floor factory, and the top floor has sprung floor, so it's a rehearsal space come open space office. So if we do rehearsals there in normal times, it'll be after 5 when the laundry staff have gone back, the office staff, and then we move all the chairs to the side, and there's a big.
Many people when the first time we came to New York and we went to public and telling everybody about this, nobody believed us until they actually came to Malaysia and they wanted to visit the laundry and the office. So if anybody's watching this, you're ever in Malaysia, you're welcome to come visit us. Yeah, you can watch us work, and you can come. We'll be grateful to meet anyone from anywhere in the world who's here and meet new friends.
Okay, our audience, let's all go and visit Kuala Lumpur.
Come to Malaysia, we'll take you around. But the main aim of it was that we continue to work through it, because we had
have papers at the wall. You
literally
brainstorming, and on the table you have photos. So what are you thinking about? What were you thinking about?
We were using even a Monopoly set. You know, the Monopoly set has all the different pieces. So we were using that to like, okay, with these characters to work on movement. Like we use anything we could get our hands on, like everyday stuff, you know. And we said, okay, we need to define each character. So then we were using this we drew a room, like the stage on a huge ping pong table, and we were working on movement and all this. So every day it can be structure, it can be just us working on movement, language. It will last a couple hours until we got mentally tired. So
to answer your question, Frank, at the moment what we're doing is we're writing a new play, and this play was basically an idea that we had for quite some time, and recently in New York in January, we managed to meet some really interesting commercial producers who saw our work at the public. So it's a potential commercial endeavor that's going to start Off-Broadway whenever that is. So whilst nothing is confirmed or happening or moving forward, we thought we'll just finish up the structure and get going with the script.
Can you talk about that, what the idea is, or is that too early?
Well, it's sort of still hush-hush at the moment.
But I'll give you a gist of what it is. It is playing with the audience, literally. If they hear something, and if they see something which are in contrast, which would they believe? So if you were to tell somebody you did something, but they saw somebody else do it, which would they believe more? And is hearing more powerful than seeing? So we are playing with a lot of ideas in that sense. We don't want to give away too much, but the idea is if you hear something first, and then later if you watch it, which is something in contrast, which will stick out in your mind more? And literally, we realized, and we've tried it with people, we actually did it, and we realized that it depends, that whatever you hear or see first sticks with you. So it's a very unique experience for people.
So long story short, to sum it up maybe in a log line, we're basically, we're trying to reinvent the whodunit. So it's a murder mystery that actually happens to it's set in Manhattan. It's about a New York family that, you know, and it's a very diverse cast. So it's sort of, you know, the protagonist, white male, he's married to, you know, Asian person. There is the, you know, African-American cop. There's also the Mexican housekeeper. And so we're basically trying to have a conversation about the American cultural structure, but again, within a whodunit, and to also kind of really complicit the audience into kind of going like, what are your
biasness?
What are your biasness from when you see, what you hear, what you assume? So that's, you know, based on, you know, which is also sort of a bit about what our show at the public was about, which is called Made in America. It's about this idea of a country that's actually made up of so many subsections of cultures, of people, and, you know, and you know, like even going to New York, it's a really fascinating thing for the two of us. When we first came there, like, you know, you walk 2 blocks to the north, and suddenly you realize it's a whole different suburb, it's a whole different community. So, you know, and everything is so subsection that is very interesting. So I think, you know, and you know, that's the idea.
I think the thing which affected us the most is that, especially when we came to the first time to New York in America about 5 years ago.
Yeah, 2015.
2015 is that a lot of people don't realize, Americans don't realize how much of their culture is exported throughout the world, and how much people understand, from the music to the arts, to the poetry, to the movies, to even to the politics, to the social dynamics, which we consume on a daily basis through news, through social media, through the newspapers, you know, through entertainment. And when we get there, it really feels, to a certain extent, which is quite interesting. It's like heading back to Rome, you know, like thousands of years ago. You knew Rome was the center, you know, and everybody knew what Rome was. And when you got there, you go, oh wow, you know, and that was the kind. So this next show also further explores that idea, and through a racial, social perspective on what we see, especially from the outside, because sometimes a lot of people don't get out what we see. So we thought, and many people found our views on stuff, especially on the show we did, especially in the show we did in the public. So once that was it was accepted, we thought, oh wow, we should continue down this route to explore that.
And also, it's that also very interesting thing, like Terry was saying, this idea of Rome where you seek sort of validation, like Chris Hemsworth was not really Chris Hemsworth until he did Thor, or, you know, Kate Blanchett became Kate Blanchett after Elizabeth, and sort of, so, I mean, you know, with all due respect, it's amazing actors in their own right in Australia or Malaysia, I mean, you know, wherever they are, but people come to America to seek fame, fortune, in this idea of the American dream, you know, and I think that's very interesting. Like, it's insane that I know that Rick Perry is the energy secretary, but I don't really know who's the energy person in Malaysia. Like, you know, like, and you know, or you're really upset about Betsy DeVos's education policy, but you kind of go, oh, who's the education minister in Malaysia? But because, you know, we consume so much American news, and, you know, case in point, and this is something that we said, you know, it's so unfortunate that one African-American had to die in Minneapolis and the whole world is protesting. Like, if that person, you know, if that happened in Australia or happened in the UK, the impact wouldn't be, but anything that happens in America trickles down to the rest of the world, which is why also there was this insane, you know, leap of excitement and hope in 2008 and this sort of great despair in 2016, because I think the rest of the world have this sort of invested idea for America to work. And I don't know why that is, but it's been the greatest marketing campaign since the 1950s. Just after World War II, America, through popular culture, it's the same reason we shout for Rocky against Ivan Drago. It's the same reason we felt like Neil Armstrong was Malaysian. Like, you know, it's because America has sold us this idea of a better place, the greatest nation on earth. And, you know, and therefore we sit down and we go, yeah, what are you doing? Like, you know, like, you can't fail. Like, this is the thing. Like, you know, we want to come and, you know, explore or make, you know, or do whatever. And, you know, and as I said, like, you know, as a company, we're not very popular in Malaysia because most of our work are international. But as soon as we do something at the public, not only do we get recognized in Malaysia, but all of a sudden we're important artists in Australia. And, you know, it's like we've been doing the same work for the last 10 years, but one project in New York, and all of a sudden, like, you know, so it is very interesting why America, you know, why America, the America succeeding is very important. The America leading is very important. And we don't know specifically why that is, because we've bought the product. And so we want the product to work. So I think that for us, you know, especially when we sit down and go like, how did we solve this COVID crisis? And, you know, it's just this insane amount. And, you know, and that kind of, you know, so I think the idea of this is sort of what that project is about. And we're still kind of developing it. And hopefully we get to show the producers something early next year when we go back there and we go like, this is the white paper, this is the draft script. And then the other project that we're currently working on is obviously, you know, Skin, which we spoken about, so the human trafficking project, and we're developing that for a sort of semi-permanent sort of installment in New York as well. So these are the two big projects that we're working on.
That's interesting, though. You were investigating reality, the class, race, that kind of chimera, the Fata Morgana, as Hannah Arendt said, of America, and this kind of imperial cosmopolitan supremacy of New York City, you know, that still is the measuring stick. And when you look closer, you know, you say, what's going on here, you know, and maybe you see even clearer from the outside what is there. Yeah,
I think a great way to look at it is when you say the word imperialism, you said for the last 100 years or even thousands of years, victory would be marching your troops into another nation. You know? Today, in today's world of capitalism, it's when your music, when a McDonald's or Starbucks opens up your corner, and you don't know what is the local culture anymore. That's what you accept, right? I want to have a coffee at the Starbucks. I want to have a McDonald's burger, and you go. It doesn't matter which part of the world you are. That's what you know, and that's when you know they have conquered the world or conquered, you know, a country.
Conquered the mind, I think. You know?
Yeah. And there's something to be said for local culture. I mean, it's a big world, and there should be a Starbucks next to a traditional coffee shop or tea house. I think there's many rooms. But how tell us a little bit about theater. You said we are not so well known here. Tell us a little bit about the theater scene in Kuala Lumpur. How does that look like? How is it organized? Who goes? Yeah. What are the companies?
Okay, so the thing is, Malaysia is a very complex country when it comes to sort of cultural diversity. So there's sort of three major racial groups. So the Malays, they're basically, so the Malays make up about 70% of the population. And then you have the Chinese, who are about 26%. 19%. 19%. And then you've got the Indians, who are about 6%. And then you've got sort of like other pockets of races. So again, similarly, the theater is divided into those sort of language streams as well. So there's Malay theater, and this is divided between traditional and contemporary. Traditional may take up many forms of sort of puppetry to sort of Malay, you know, traditional classic Malay style bangsawan theater, they call it. Sort of poetry, sort of, you know, and also different styles of music. And then there's contemporary Malay theater, which sort of uses a bit of blends between traditional Malay and also sort of contemporary Western theater and styles or techniques. And then you've got traditional Chinese theater, which is sort of anything from Cantonese opera to sort of Mandarin plays. And then also you have Indian classical and sort of Indian contemporary. And then, of course, in urban areas like Kuala Lumpur and Penang, there is this sort of pockets of contemporary English theater, you know, and when I guess anybody comes into Malaysia, I think that sort of to tourists, to expats, to sort of the urban communities, the contemporary English theatre, sort of what gets the most sort of eyeballs and whatever not. But that's very city-specific, urban-specific to Kuala Lumpur, and also maybe Penang up north, which is the other big city. And then there's sort of little pockets. Very recently, over the last 10 years, of course, the contemporary scene has started growing. So obviously this, with the internet and so on and so forth, and with marketing and then sort of theater becoming, so what used to happen in the sort of mid-90s, late 80s, mid-90s, there were very few full-time practitioners. So there were people who'd be lawyers during the day and then theater performers in the evening. But over the years, it's become more and more a sustainable industry because there's been a growing audience, which, as I said earlier, capitalistically sustain the industry. So more and more younger people, as Malaysia sort of evolved into a sort of a more of a higher income society, more, I guess, younger people could suddenly, perform or act because they've got sort of families to support. And so lots of people, so diving into the industry had sort of grown, the industry started to grow, theater courses started appearing in universities, and all of this happened in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s, and it sort of grew. So as of now, there's a good about 50 or 60 sort of really interesting contemporary theater companies that occupy the city area, and a lot more sort of cultural organizations and societies that sort of do classical performances. So that's roughly the diaspora. And then, of course, there are the big venues that then program the smaller companies, and so that is also a business. And since 2009 or 10, Malaysia started its sort of first big international arts festival called the Georgetown Festival, which is in Penang. And so that was started as part of when Georgetown, which is the city up north, was awarded the World Heritage status because it was a heritage site. And with that UNESCO heritage status, they decided to have an arts festival, which actually grew into one of the biggest, most vibrant festivals in the region. And so through that festival, a lot of big names started coming to Malaysia. There was an aspiration for Malaysian artists to be part of that festival, because you're looking at people like Royston Abel, people like Sidi Labi, people like Akram Khan were coming to that festival and performing. And so suddenly, it was a destination. And because Penang is an island, it was kind of, and the festival took up the entire month of August. So every August, all of Southeast Asia would sort of come to Penang, and suddenly, it was the place to be. And there was a great excitement, and and the festival celebrated its 10th anniversary last year, and it was going to be another big celebration this year before COVID hit. So, I think that's sort of where we're at. So 10 and 20 years ago, it was sort of a part-time industry with a very few key players who were doing it full-time. Now we have an international festival. We now have, I guess, a cultural organization that is an arm, a government arm that actually got formal funding for the contemporary arts. Artists are being sent to arts markets. So, it's a very growing and, burgeoning industry, which has come to a sudden halt at a time when it was really growing, really pushing the boundaries, really trying to ask people about, we are here, we are making stuff, and we, and people are seeing it, and we are contributing, we need more support. And that was exactly where it was as an industry, as a market. And then it's, then obviously, it sort of stopped. But as Terry said, I think this stop comes at a very interesting time, because now the screaming has gotten louder. People have sort of pointed out, look at what's happened. And I think this new government that has sort of taken over in the last few months are actually, I don't know if they're paying attention or not, but they've taken meetings.
That's
So,
amazing. Yeah.
yeah,
Such a vibrant energy that's so fast, a change towards theater and performance, which is a good sign for any society, you know, when it flourishes, when it is respected, when people go, something is working, enjoying life, celebrating life, joining joyfully in the suffering of others, as we say, why theater is important. So we all should go and visit Malaysia, come to the Georgetown Festival, see your work, and not perhaps just focus on our European knowledge of where to go when you want to theater. Both of you, you have, I think, a connection to Australia, and that's where you went to school. But tell us, why did you want to do theater? What moves you? What keeps your motor running? Why theater and not just the laundromat?
Well, well, you know, I don't think you can be cool laundromat people, you know. But no, I think so. Sort of my personal story is I was doing law, and my mom said, "I'm not paying for a law degree that you're going to half do. So if you want to do art, go to a proper art school." And I went to the Victorian College of the Arts in Melbourne. And so that was kind of where my Australian journey sort of started. But I had met Terry when I went to college before going to Australia. And like I said, we're storytellers, and we used to tell funny stories to each other all the time. And then suddenly I sort of went to a theatre school, and I, you know, sort of learned a couple of theatre tricks.
When you want to go to a theatre school, you go to Australia?
Well, it was cheaper than going to the UK or the US, because the Australian.
But there's nothing in Malaysia where you would go, or in
Well, at that time, there wasn't a formal course whatsoever. Yeah, at that time. So this was early 2000.
There was nothing which you could go and say, look, I'm going to go study acting, or I'm going to go study at this course. There was nothing at that point which had been formalized in the education system or any universities. Today, there are a lot of universities and colleges which do offer courses in the arts, from directing to writing to acting. But back then, when we finished our O levels and were coming out of high school, we literally, there were options with either you go find a job or you go study which is something reputable. Unlike that, I had to study to be an accountant. So it was a very, very, to tell your families and your friends that you wanted to do the arts was literally saying, oh, you're going to be a bum for the rest of your life. Yeah. Literally. So it was a very different mindset back then when we first started. And literally,
that is not so long ago, right? That is.
I'll tell you a really funny story. When we first started putting up our shows, I was working literally for this company, and I would, every time my boss would sneak out, Govin will be waiting in a cafe downstairs. I will run down, we will start writing scripts and everything, and then he will call me and say, where are you? And I'll say I was in the washroom, I was out, and I'll run back up, go do work, and then I will come back down within half an hour and continue writing together with him while he pieced the story together. So it was such, and we thought, look, we would start doing the shows, we will do it on the weekends and after work, and then literally we ended up at the public theater 7 years later. So you asked.
I think it turned out we were quite funny, so I think that was a good thing, and I think people started liking what we were putting out. But
someone did ask me once, like, how did you get started? I said we have no idea. We just did something we were passionate about. So yeah,
it's funny, also serious, your work. It's a great mixture. Look at the world of how you represent the world and how you see it, and
I think I think a lot of people are sort of really, I think I've been on a lot of talks over the last few months, few weeks actually, about what's going to happen, where things are going to go. And look, I don't know about other artists, but if I were to make an educated guess, I think we are going to have around the world some of the best theater in the next 3 years.
Correct.
Because everybody has sat back and started to think and started to, to instead of just jumping from script to script or idea to idea, they sat back and actually started putting everything down. And also,
tell us, what did you find thinking? What do you feel? Why do you do theater? What did you find out in these 2 months of confinement? What is it exactly that went through your minds?
A very interesting thing is that people ask us to say, like, how are businesses going to survive? How are theater companies going to survive? How is arts going to survive? Govin and I have always believed this. Arts will find a way. And as Govin said, we will see, we strongly believe that a lot of good art will start coming out in a couple of months to next year. It's a very simple thing, is that not everybody may not survive this period, which is true. I mean, when I mean survive, I mean economically, whether they can continue to do work. But also through that, a lot of people will find opportunities, smaller artists who now have a voice to actually they will have new audiences listen to them, because a lot of older artists have moved on and couldn't sustain creating work. So when one door closes, another door opens.
And also just to put things as a sort of example kind of case study sort of thing, one of the things that we did in this 2 months was actually look at examples in history where something like this have happened in different sort of industries. And one of the really interesting sort of industries that we look at was the aviation industry. So now after 9/11, it's not obviously a sustained period, but after 9/11, there was a serious kind of change to the aviation industry. All of a sudden, people were afraid of flying. Airline stocks crashed, and suddenly going to the airport was a whole new experience. There were metal detectors, there was security checks, you had to go through TSA in America and all sorts of other little things across the world, and this affected the entire world. So now you're no longer spending 45 minutes in the airport, you're spending 3 hours. What happened from there is suddenly every airport over the next few years became a shopping haven because people were spending more time in the airport. So retail started opening up. One of the other things that sort of also happened is the budget airline industry. All of a sudden, people were flying without baggage, without food. So the airline industry had to adapt. So, 10 years on, people were flying more than ever, but you had created a very different kind of consumer. Someone who didn't need any of the frills, someone who, so some airlines went down, some airlines had to do all these tiered economy, whatever, and some airlines just, was like, Ryanair or EasyJet. So,
having baggage became a luxury, so you didn't have to go through checks. So what it did is it afforded opportunities for budget airlines, and so a lot of things changed overnight.
And I think, looking at that case study, it was a very interesting thing because so whilst this may seem like a dark and gloomy period, actually it is a very exciting period of what art might look like in a few months. And I think we've spent a few years, and I think we've spent the last few months really thinking about, well, if we do this show or any type of work from here on in, like, what are we missing? What is the new consumer going to be like? Now my dad knows how to watch things on his phone. He never knew how to do that. But now he watches YouTube videos and online streaming things like nothing. So you've got a new consumer that you've got to compete with. Like, why should I come out and pay $60 for something that, I can watch Netflix at home? So there are lots of these new questions which are coming up, and there are lots of grants that are coming up from different countries about digitizing, making things more whatever, which are all very responsive. But I think a lot of artists, some have jumped onto that opportunity, some have started using that to kind of create online archives or whatever not. But one of the things that we also firmly believe in is that there is nothing like live theater as well, which is, if you look at the airline industry, the big people still want to fly. People still want to fly in luxury, and there's nothing like sitting in business class or whatever you want to call it. So in that thing, no online thing is going to beat seeing Pavarotti sing live, or no virtual picture is going to be like seeing a Picasso in front of you, or no sort of online video is going to look like a Pina Bausch company dance, and therefore I think people are always going to go to live events. But what we're going to have to deal with is like a whole strata of society who have now become consumers of content. And that nevertheless, you're looking at, somebody's got to create that content, and that is the artist. So there's going to be a whole lot of new content, a whole lot of new artists creating newer kinds of works. That means the older, more established artists or whatever not are going to have to look at that and kind of go, not top that or whatever, but kind of respond to that and adapt to actually, which is what is so exciting about, when they find the vaccine or whenever that is, and, we can all go out without a mask and make out again. That is what is, so exciting for us. And we sitting there, okay, do we want to be part of that excitement or not? So let's sit down and make the most exciting show to be able
and
to.
Why do you, to come back to that, why do you do theater? Why do you do it? What's your goal? Why do you do it?
Do you want to answer? Can I answer this question?
Go for it.
Okay. Well, so as I said, like, we like to tell stories, and we found out, and and my background is I graduated as a production designer, so I do lighting and set design. And I guess the key principle of set and lighting design is, it's sort of how you're designing the viewing, hearing experience for the audience. And because we started with that, and when I sort of spoke about conceptual ideas to Terry, it always came from a design point of view. And that design point of view really meant, if we want to tell stories, right in the middle is who we're telling the story to, which is the audience. And when the audience wants to hear a story, genre doesn't matter. It can be art, it can be theater, it can be song, it can be dance, and it can be how you place them, where you place them, whether in a shipping container or in the middle of a cafe or in a bar or in a black box theater. And I think that became the most exciting thing, because what we were creating, or what we like creating and what we'll always create, is what we call active theater. That's a term that we coined, but essentially what it means is that we want to activate the audience. So you're not passively sitting and watching something, you're actively involved, where things happen to you and around you, and you're immersed in the story, and it's being told in a 360-degree sort of viewing pot. And I think when our audiences come out and they've gone, and they go, I've never seen anything like that, or I've never heard that story told in that way. Like, I think that's sort of what makes it so much fun and why we do what we do. So I think, and the idea of being able to tell a story honestly and truthfully in a very clever way, that's sort of, I guess, why we do theater, in the way we do it.
Yeah, you can watch a movie, you can hear a song, but through theater, whether it's musical theater, dance, you get an experience. So that is one of the things which I've always found challenging as when you create a work and when the audience responds, because they're there, they're seeing you in this creative process and they're experiencing it live. So, and there are moments when you get something so perfect in theater and you go, wow, it's really amazing when you're there for that with your audience. So it is an experience which is, it's unique and unlike any other form of medium which you can tell a story through.
Is it political theater what you do, or?
No, I think, well, look, I always keep telling them, whether it's a work about human trafficking or whether it's a work that questions the form of government, I think, yes, the works have sort of crossed those lines, but we always just call it, we kind of do it through humor. So, whether it's an observation about America, whether it's about interviewing you if you're good enough to watch my show, I think there is everything we look at it. I think, I think like our favorite art form is stand-up comedy. And, if you look at, comedians like Chris Rock or Dave Chappelle or Jerry Seinfeld, I think there's some really poignant, interesting social observations that, if you break it down, there's really interesting political and social commentary. And I think using that, we always feel humor disarms a lot of people, but also because a lot of our work, as I said, because the audience are the center of what we want to create around, it always sort of encapsulates them, their fears, their inhibitions into the project. So, so for something like that to work, you've got to not just appeal to one or two, you've got to kind of actually include everyone in. And I think humor often is the best way to do that.
And I don't think we are political at all. I think when we decide on a story, it's because we think it's a great story and we have a unique way to tell that story. And people can say it's political, they can say it's funny, they can say, but I think it comes down to the heart of our challenge is telling a good story and finding a good way a unique way for the audience to experience that story. That has always been our challenge, and in whatever endeavor we undertake to speak.
It's quite powerful, you know. Let's look at it closely to say use humor, create a story audience enjoy, they experience, that is, as you call, an active theater, that it resonates with them, and that you say be independent, as you guys do, you know, work with the governments and try that it happens, but be independent so you can really do what you do. Is the joke could be you live above your circumstances, you know, your laundromat is your circumstance, but you live above it, but in a good way. And and that you also, you know, point out that in a way it is an engagement in a world that has a business related side, and the idea of stand-up comedy, which is interesting because it's an individual experiencing the world in a very individual way. You
and
know,
it gives you a very unique,
very private, often intimate moment, painful moments, and but they are funny and they are honest, and they are often quite disastrous stories, and but they are.
Everybody gets to access it as well. I think that's one of the things which we often pride ourselves on. Like, you know, to be able to, that our work is accessible to everyone. To everyone, and that's something you learn from also, I think, from that multi background community. Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, and I was just saying, Frank, I think I'll tell you one really quick story about accessibility, which is one of my favorite stories. So when we did Skin, one of the things, you know, it's an insane show. For 60 people, we had to close down roads, and, you know, we had to talk to the police to block stuff, and because there was a truck that was going to drive through the city and so on and so forth with a shipping container. And one of the things, so we tried to you know, get discounts and wherever we can, because when we first produced the first version, there was no funding, and then, you know, we had to put it all together. So basically, to get the shipping container and the 40-foot container and the truck driver, we had to go to a logistics company that was in a port about 45 minutes outside Kuala Lumpur. And we had to explain to the owner of the port that we wanted his driver, an empty container, and we wanted him to come at these particular times and whatever not. And you know, and they did some math, and they said it was going to cost 12,000 ringgit, which is about $3,000 US for the whole period. And in Malaysia, what you have to do is you've got to write a check for 50%, so that, you know, we gave them a check for 6,000 ringgit. And of course, the driver came, and, you know, and we did the rehearsals and whatever not. And of course, for opening night, we invited this guy to come along, and he's never been to a theater show in his life. He doesn't speak much English. He speaks Malay and Chinese. He comes with his sort of his wife, and they, you know, they sort of dressed up like they're going to the opera, because they thought it was this show that was a theater show and something that the elite upper classes do. And so they came very well dressed. And of course, you know, they were put through the ranks, and they had to do the whole thing. And, you know, the wife and him were separated. He had the champagne and the pretzels. She was on the truck, and, you know, he saw how his truck was being used. And at the end, after the whole kind of experience talking to the human rights orgs and whatever not, this is the guy who's never seen any theater. You've thrown him into a truck seeing contemporary dance, and he looks at me and he just gives me like a thumbs up, and he says, "Oh, very, very, very good, very good," and then he leaves. You know, and then we don't hear from him for about a week, and then I come to the office, and one morning, and one of our admin staff basically says, "Oh, boss, there's an envelope for you, and it's from the company." And he returned our $6,000 deposit. He said he didn't want to take any money. So he said, he was like, yeah. And there was a little note saying, "Thank you very much, no need money." And he returned our check. So, again, something must have happened for this person to be able to access that production. And for him, a businessman, never been to the theater, to hand back a check and said, and literally, "Thank you very much, no need money." That was his note. And so we sat there and go, that was better than any newspaper review. That was better than any Facebook post. That was better than any kind of thing. Because I sat there and went, this is something that you can do. And, and I think for a long time, I think the arts often, sometimes, they fail to include, and they fail to give access, and and it's all about the exclusivity and who goes where, and whether you perform this venue or that venue and so on and so forth. But I think at the end of the day, it comes back down to the audience and the people that you actually want to connect with, and the people you want to tell these stories to. And I think as long as you've got good stories, people will want to hear it in whichever way or form, which is why I think the arts will survive. And I think that's going to be, it's going to be a pretty exciting few years.
What a great story. Also the idea that you define the driver and the company as your audience, that you want them involved, that they understood what you did. And it was about human trafficking. This was a serious work. And as you said, with modern dance, I saw a bit of the video, conceptual modern dance with it. So this is, it is really stunning. Like Peter Schumann yesterday, who said, we did our shows in the early 60s in Spanish. We performed on the streets. Puerto Rican kids had to go to Vietnam War. The mothers asked us, they commissioned him to write a play or to do something because they saw them. And he said that letter was said, we regret to inform you. The mothers got those letters that their sons had died. And I said, we of course did it also. We had interpreters. That was our audience, and nobody cared about that. And that's why it says the show they did most, the most significant one they ever, he felt perhaps they ever did. And by the way, interesting, the laundry and bed sheets and hospital. He said he got, I don't know if you saw it, he got from the old from the old hotel that broke down, and now he's painting on the bed sheets that were most probably came out of some laundry. So there is some connection to that whole COVID experience we're having. We are having here. Thank you guys. Really, I know we just scratched the surface, but I think this is important work, what you do. There's an important culture, and I think something produces the mixture of it, and the mixture of Western influences, US and European, but your own traditions, your thinking, your new approach to it, and being trained in Australia. So this is exciting and great, and the world should pay attention. Rachel Cooper said from the Asia Society, this world has to be represented. It is such a big part, and she's so very right. And I'm glad we have you here with us. And like world music is significant. Every musician listens to music from the world to make his own music. And we theater people in performance, we have to do the same, and we really have to listen. If we learn anything in the Corona time, that it is the time, as you say, to study, to go on the break, to listen. As a finishing question, let's say you guys were just in Australia and the school and the COVID would have happened, or the people around the world who produce theater, who are engaged in the arts and who are perhaps still in lockdown. So what is your advice? We spoke to our colleagues in Brazil. This is devastating. There's this no money, actual harassment, censorship. Ministry of Culture has been dismantled. Almost 1 million cases now, and it's being still denied. The government officially says don't count the cases. What do you say to artists who are engaging in a way the world as you do, and say we want to tell stories, but how should they use this time, and what is of importance? How should they? What does it mean?
I think it's very important that they continue this fight. What is being pushed on them, censorship, to continue to tell the story so the rest of us can hear it. That is the job that is our jobs, is that to continue to ensure that our stories, our experience get told. And I think to every other person out there, whether they're in Brazil, they're in America, going through this horrific situation, because it has decimated, it has decimated income, it's decimated families, it's friends, and everything. So the thing is to be strong and to continue to keep working, no matter what means are available to us, to keep writing, to keep telling stories, to keep it going, because that's the only way which we can, because people are confined at home, people are confined in, if you're suspected of COVID, you're taken to a hospital and you're quarantined. So it's a very, very harsh reality which we all are facing in 2020, and nobody has got the answers. Governments are lost. Some governments are getting it right. Some governments are getting it wrong. And so many organizations are fighting to survive. So the thing which we keep telling people when we talk to artists, to organizations around the world is keep fighting, keep telling the stories, and we all have got to adapt, and nobody has the answer now. We wish we did, but there will come a time when we all will want to hear the stories, because that's what we are, chroniclers.
And if I can add one other thing, which is something that personally happened to me, I think this is also an unprecedented opportunity to actually get to know yourself. When you spend so much time in isolation in your own house, you start to notice, sort of your arm fat down there. You start to notice that, this is how your hair grows. And you start to actually look at yourself and you get this opportunity to question everything that you believe in, that you thought you believe in, because there's never been a period of time where you've had such intense investigation of self and why you do what you want to do. And I think if an artist gets to use this time to actually look and, if say, for example, your government is doing this, and then you're like, why are you upset with that? Like, what is it about what they're doing that really pisses you off? Is it just because everybody's pissed off, but why is it that you are pissed off? The ability to understand that, to understand why you like, using your knife in your left hand instead of your right. And this is a really interesting thing, but you go like, well, why is that? And I think the more you can start to understand yourself and why you're responding to things in very particular ways, I think that is going to help you tell more original stories. And also it's going to help you really send out a story from your unique perspective of why these things upset you. And I think if people can latch on to that, then I think you create a movement. I think with the very, very sad case of George Floyd, I think what we saw on that video was basically what we all started the questions, why are we upset with that? What about that video was so upsetting? And that everybody had an individual reaction to that moment. And that individual reaction started a group reaction, which started a national movement, which now started a global movement. So I think this period is about looking at all those moments, and never in my lived life, I've never had this opportunity. And, it's not like World War II where, yes, things didn't function, but there were bombs going off everywhere. This is like, everything is quiet, everything is peaceful. You get, internet, this is an insane privilege, and you get to talk with people more than ever. And I think this is the opportunity the artists to actually take to understand themselves so that they can better tell stories. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and something to really consider, know yourself and get to know yourself. Observe, you have your body and you can observe. And then from the individual experience to your community, to your city, and then from your country, and to have a global consciousness while acting and working locally. So this is a really, really important to hear from you. Congratulations on your work. It's stunning to hear what you do, how you do it, your story, and it's inspiring. It's also full of energy. And I think also the news from your country, that it is dealing so well with it, that the arts are flourishing, that, art schools are opening, festivals are happening, and that you do work that, the established festivals are happy to have in, because it is something new that looks at the same in a different way, in a new way. And you found a new form in your container play, and the idea of the active theater is something you really might think about more, or write something, a little booklet about your work while you're out there. So thank you really, really, really for showing it. It's almost, no, it's past 1 o'clock. And yes, it is great. I saw some feet on the leg there, so on the bed behind you. So it is sleeping time in Kuala Lumpur. And thank you really, really for joining us. And for all of you, tomorrow we have the great Tanya Bruguera. You really, something not to miss, like today. She will talk about her work in Cuba and why she does the art, and how much trouble it gets her, but also what a real significant effect it has, and what an artist actually can do by one single artist who started out as an art student at a university, and Hope Azeda from Rwanda. I think she's a fantastic and brilliant artist to hear from here, and Saman Amini from Iran, who's in the Netherlands. So stay with us this week. It's really a journey around the world, what we take again this week. Thanks for HuRU-hARa at Emerson College for hosting us, VJ, Thea, and Travis, my team, Sanyang and Andy. And to you audience members, I know some of you really listen very, very often. Last night I had a talk, and people who say that it also, you know, is a staple of their days, of their weeks. They know they can tune in if they want, and they're interested in that. It is so meaningful what you tell the audiences about your work and life, and that it is expression of a new time also we do live in, that we are connected, that we listen to each other, that what you do is important. But also listening is of significance. And then, as you guys said, you know, change yourself, also change in an authentic way, and use this time as a way to make the world better. As we know, especially in America, things are not working. The forms are not right. The results are not right. There is structural problems there here. It is now open, as you guys also said, and we know it, but what's important is what do you do with knowledge, and we have to do something to change it. So thank you all, and have a good night, and to our audience, I hope you will stay safe, stay tuned, and see you again this week or tomorrow.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Frank.